All right, we're back. Chapter 4, game number 2. We're going to look at the f6 e5 plan for black.
Which is kind of like the mainstay of the course. It's like we built the course's repertoire for the exchange variation is built around this plan.
Right. So at this point, you could go for a minority attack with like knight f6, a6, b5. And I think that's how most players play it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that plan. But I like this going knight to ge2 because or ge7 and because we can still do the minority attack, but this opens up a new idea, which is to play f6 and e5, which is perhaps a bit more dangerous for both sides.
And I think at the club level, it's pretty effective for black as well. You know, a lot of players from the white side don't really see it coming or they don't appreciate the strength of this plan.
I agree. Because I think that white is used to in this line they're used to, like, they know that their plan is supposed to be to attack on the king side, and we're saying, well, that's what we're going to do too.
Mhm.
And I think that when that firepower happens, we tend to do better because we have an extra central pawn.
So white plays knight to f1 here. And an interesting thing with this position, the knight either wants to go to e3 or g3, but the combination of trying to get that knight and the bishop developed gets a little bit uncomfortable. They both want to go to e3. g3, the knight's going to get captured by our bishop on d6. All right, so we should castle here, right?
You could.
This is a problem. Bishop takes h7 check. King takes. Knight g5 check. King g6 would also be bad because pawn g4. But otherwise, the bishop is getting captured. So don't castle here. We mentioned this in the course. You want to take one moment and play h6.
Which, feels a bit awkward because you're like, oh no, I'm going to have to go to g6, and then maybe this is going to be weird. But like, often we want to trade these light square bishops anyway. It is our bad bishop, and so we're pretty happy to trade these bishops.
And the e7 knight defends g6, so it's working well for that too. All right, b4. What's the idea with b4 for white? Why do they want that backward c3 pawn?
I don't know if they want the backward c4 pawn so much as they're they're anticipating that we're going to still go for a6 b5 and then b4, and this is never going to happen. It's hard to play b4 when there's already a pawn on b4. So this is like an anti-minority attack and something that you're going to see a lot.
And I've played this exact type of line before as black and gotten really bad position where you play a6, b5, and then white plays a4 here. And after the a and b pawns trade, what happens is you get a isolated pawn sitting on b5 with no buddies to defend it. And that's just
Yeah.
not fun for black.
Now, when they early go for this b4, we do have some ideas that we could kind of switch gears away from f6 e5 for maybe a little bit, and even just play rook to c8 and try to play against this backwards pawn. That's a legitimate way to play.
Yeah, I agree. And I think f6 though is nice because you do get that pawn rolling. So in this specific position, we got bishop and knight lined up here, or
Hmm.
a pawn fork away, I guess I should say. Let's go for that. E5, E4. Create some problems for white right away.
I agree.
White plays A4, completely ignoring the threat. If B5 is played, we should just mention this. Our knight sits really well on A5, blocking the A pawn and guarding C4.
Yeah, we're probably not going to go to c4 just yet because we don't really want to allow that capture. Uh, but we always have this threat of coming to c4.
Yeah, so we can just park there for a while. Maybe trade light square bishops first, and then sink the knight into C4.
Yeah, and if that happens, then I think we're definitely going to maybe consider strongly about not playing e5 and just adding some pressure against the backward c pawn.
Hmm. So B4 was played, F6, now A4 by white. And here we go. Pawn to E5, threatening the fork with pawn to E4 next.
Yeah, and the really, if white just chooses to say drop the bishop back, well, okay, let's pretend the queen was on d2 or something. Or yeah, this works. Okay, we're still gonna we have this idea of playing e4. The knight moves. Maybe we got to move our bishop. Maybe we take. Not sure. But then we just followed up with f5, f4,
Yeah,
and
so we're just
this is I just say this is just always something. If they ever don't take when you play e5, this is always the idea. It's just to follow it up with the second pawn.
And JD's an expert on this line because you play it for both sides. Like you play the Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation from our classical D4 course. We get these same positions from the white side, with the E pawn and F pawn just marching up the board like this.
Yeah, Matt and I were just talking about these positions, and we're looking over this game briefly. And like honestly, if you just like change the colors of the pawns, I would honestly believe that you've had this position from the white side. It seems like we should be down a tempo somewhere because we're black, but like I don't know where that tempo is.
Yeah, E takes E5, F takes E5.
Actually, I found the tempo. Normally, as white, we have a rook on the D file when we're doing this, and we don't yet have a rook on the D file. So that's the tempo that we're down.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that does help. But I feel like white's, pieces on the third rank was just not the ideal setup. You don't want this fork threat that causes a lot of additional problems. So white has to drop that bishop back, bishop to E2. Now bishop to F7 was played. So what do you think of this idea, dropping the bishop back to F7?
I like it because maybe this is a fault of mine or something, but I strongly like to not trade pieces, especially when I feel like I'm attacking. So I like this idea of dropping back. It covers the D pawn, frees up the knight to come to F4. Maybe we're going to put it on E6 and just reroute it more towards the king. And I think this is great.
And one thing that's nice about this position too is you kind of have everything all compact in tight behind these advanced pawns, and you can sort of wait for white to make a mistake again. So we see this time and time again where white will make a weakness in their position and then we pounce on it. We kind of are getting that set up. Like we have at least one more good developing move, rook to D8, and we can wait and see what white does because it's not so clear what white's plan is with all their pieces jumbled up on the first three ranks.
Yeah, I think that playing E4 was perhaps a bit too early. And this is like, I'm talking to myself here. I'm not preaching to you guys because like I have a tendency to play like I play E5, they take, and then I play E4 immediately. And I'm like, yeah, this is my plan. It feels great and direct and concrete, but like, and this is probably fine. But it's certainly a bit better to chill for a second. And that we don't have to be in a big hurry. We do still have pieces that we could imagine the same position, but like we have the knight on F5 and already have a rook on E8 or something. Like, we didn't have to rush into this. We can prepare it a bit more.
Yeah, and I think one key thing to keep in mind with these pawns is when they're side by side, they're a lot stronger. They control all of these squares and they can't easily be blockaded. It's very committal to move one up because then they can easily be blockaded. So we want to wait to push a pawn until we know we can really get something good out of it.
I think it's pretty telling that the engine says the best move here is just to play A5, which does what exactly?
Yes. So white needs
I
to
mean,
wait, right?
yeah, if we look at other options, I mean, knight to G3, which maybe feels natural, just does run into E4, and we're going to pick up a pawn. You can't play bishop out to D3 because that's walks into a fork. Sorry. I mean, what if you try to do something like queen to C7? Well, that's a threat now because the queen's hanging. Like, it's not that easy to find a move that makes sense. I mean, okay, fine. Maybe yeah, okay, that's not so.
Yeah, I
I
agree
mean,
with you. There's
if that's the move you're going to play, like you're not accomplishing anything with that. So I
yeah.
think it's not easy to find a move. And so recognizing that and just sitting and saying, okay, it's on you to figure out a move that like improves your position somehow.
So white plays B5, and it's sort of like we talked about in reverse, right? This is now opening up holes for our pieces. We have knight to A5. The knight guards this C4 square. Also, maybe I is B3 in combination with the bishop. So all of a sudden, it's opening up these extra squares that we can utilize going into this endgame.
Yeah, and it's the impetus is still on white to find useful moves.
Yeah.
Rook to C1, just defending a pawn. I mean, that kind of sucks.
And we look at these pieces just optically, everything is tied down. Black's got the initiative, creating the threats. So now we see knight to F5 by black, threatening to win the bishop pair right away with knight takes E3. And white allows it with queen to C2. So if you were playing black here, would you take on E3?
No. Okay, we have way more central space. And if I take on E3, that dumb knight on F1 all of a sudden gets to hang out on E3. yes, we get the bishop pair, but like the position for white just gets freer. And that knight adds pressure to d. So like with the knight on e3, we have less threats, and white can maybe slide over a piece to the d file, and all of a sudden they actually have some real pressure on d5.
And the nice thing about that question, JD, there was no wrong answer. So I do think taking is still good, but I agree with you. I think instead of having the bishop pair, let's keep the white pieces a bit clumsy because we are still attacking, and I think it gives white a lot more chances to go wrong from a practical sense. I like what black did here. Bishop to e6. Let's keep everything on the board.
Yeah, just improving it. Our rook is now open. Uh, yeah, this is just feels good. Like maybe when we play queen d7, move our knight and go all Tartakower style and sack on h3.
Yeah, or queen f2 or queen f7. Bring her out through the
Queen,
light squares.
yeah, queen f7, and then maybe I'm thinking about taking on e3. I play e4, take on e3, and then with a pretty serious check. Like this looks fantastic.
And I think so. This is a middle game course primarily. I think this is a really good learning opportunity in terms of realizing the advantage. So we've been sitting on kind of like a two pawn stockfish edge for a while now. Instead of taking e3, which was a good move still according to stockfish, what we're doing here is we are keeping this extra tension in the position, and we're not immediately simplifying, making it easier for our opponent to defend, right? So we're playing queen f7 and we just have all of these threats in the board. You can do that when you're already up two instead of going with the old chess rule, hey, trade when you're up. I mean, you could be up material here instead of up dynamically, right? But sometimes you don't want to just trade down. You want to keep building more and more pressure. And then by the time you trade, maybe you're completely winning.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And it's still hard to find moves for white.
So he plays bishop to d2. I mean, look at these last few moves, just shuffling. Rook d1, bishop to d2. Uh, if rook to d2 was played, for example, we can actually play b6, slow play it a little bit. Rook c8 next, tuck our king away, knight to b3, knight back to c5. Just kind of giving you an example of the flow of the pieces. We have a lot of nice options here. And
Yeah, all of our moves have like made sense. We've improved our position. We've done good things. Whereas white, white just had to like white's just like hanging out and like just waiting to be like, all right, I'm gonna get hit soon. I don't know where. I just know it's
yeah,
gonna hurt, and I'm just waiting to figure out where I'm gonna get hit at.
it's like they're just waiting to lose an exchange or something, it feels like. Okay, just some point in my rook or fork me with a knight. You just got to give something up here. Bishop d2 played. Now we finally see e4. And the reason it's played now is because we are opening up the dark square diagonal, and there's not a great square for the f3 knight to move. That's actually maybe the more important point. Where does white put
you
the knight?
can't go to d4 because then we'll take it, and then we're gonna take on h2. So you can't. If you could go to d4, you're probably doing okay, but you can't go to d4. You have to go even more passive.
So the best move is knight back to h2, which was not played in the game. Knight d4 was played in the game. But look at this. Knight back to h2. Queen g6 now and creating new threats.
How do you even stop them, or can you? What do you? Okay, this I guess that technically stops it with the h5, and then you're just right back where you were.
Yeah, trade that off. Take h3. So it's still falling, and the white king side is falling next. All
So
right.
instead, d4 was played.
Yeah, knight d4.
This takes, and okay, you got to take it, and then if there's not a mate here, then I don't. There's got to be something god awful is going to happen to white.
But black just grabs the bishop. And white
I
resigns.
refuse to believe. I refuse to believe there's not something better.
Okay, I am looking at Stockfish. It likes rook a to c8 better. How about that?
Okay, all right. What's the best thing? I just what is okay? So okay, let's just say you move the queen out of the way,
Oh, now
and
there's
then
bishop takes h3.
why did that? Why was that possible now after this rook c8? Why wasn't that possible immediately? I guess it
It's different. This is only a 3-point advantage.
only.
Because if rook c8 now, white could take c8. But
Makes
before, the
sense.
bishop was guarding c8. Okay. So it's a nice little in-between move to improve the rook. Right? So if you take
Takes
here, you
takes.
take back with the bish.
Okay. And
Or
after
no,
the bishop,
you mate, sorry, you mate.
yeah. You just made. Okay, all right, fine. We just went up a bishop. That's good enough. You can forgive white for not trying to find something better than just winning the free piece and keeping an attack.
Yeah. Yeah, black did a good job still.
Yeah. I suppose our threat right now is to take on f1 and then mate on h2.
Yeah. Yep. Rook takes F1 is a huge threat here. Alright, so this was a pretty smooth game with the F6 E5 plan. What was your key takeaway from the game?
I think that the most important thing that we should take away from this game is that holding the pawns on e5 and d5 and just improving our position behind those pawns and just trusting that we have more space and better ways to maneuver our pieces around than white does. And just seeing how sort of like helpless white was to just sort of wait and try to find some way to organize their pieces that didn't lose material. And doing that, I think the impetus is really on white to untangle and then constantly have to look for tactics and problems. And like, okay, fine, we can make a move that looks natural and maybe it has a tactic, maybe it doesn't. And we don't have to care so much, but white has to care because if there is one, the game ends.
Right. I think that's a really good point. I love this game by black, and we will see you guys in the next game, game number 3 of the chapter.